Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Carl Jung. This is Mysterium Coniunctionis. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people do find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, the link for my book, the link to get in contact with me directly so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. I'm also going to take a minute just to ask you for a favor. If you enjoy what you see here, go ahead and hit all of the things below, the like, the share, the subscribe button. But in addition to that, there is a new button called Hype. That is for us smaller channels so that you can have a free way to promote us once a day. And so if you feel like I have provided value to you, I would appreciate it if you would hit the hype button so that we can get out to a larger audience. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of Mysterium Coniunctionis with Salt, Part D. The fourth of the three. We should get through 2 chapters today. We will see how it goes. D, the fourth of the 3. In the course of his mystic peregrination, that means travels, Meyer reached the red Erythraean Sea in the following way. He journeyed to the 4 directions: to the north, Europe; to the west, America; to the east, Asia. Footnote 505. Footnote 505 is, Meyer makes the following equations. Europe equals earth, America equals water, Asia equals air, Africa equals fire, and all of that is incorrect. Yeah, all of that is automatically going to be incorrect. There is no particular continent that portrays any one of these particular traits. That is a complete misunderstanding of what the traits are and geography. Leaving Asia and turning south to Africa, he found a statue of Mercury made of silver with a golden head. I wonder if that's still around. Y'all should let me know if you know that that is still around. The statue pointed to paradise, which he espied far off. Now, because of its 4 rivers, and because it was the abode of the originally androgynous primordial man, Adam, the Garden of Eden was a favorite mandala of Christian iconography, and is therefore a symbol of totality, and from the psychological point of view, of the self. I will take just a moment to point out something that may not be apparent to most people. If you have not had a psychedelic experience, a otherworldly experience, you may not know this. Right? When you take psychedelics, you see the mandala. That is why it is such a popular thing in iconography. You literally see it in front of your eyes. That is how it works. Now, you can do that without any of the psychedelics. That is part of the process that I talk about in here, the flexing of the third eye, breaking that calcination off of there that did not come from water. You can do that, and you can stimulate this vision within yourself. Now, I say that as someone who cannot willfully envision anything, right? Up until very recently, have not been able to intentionally envision anything. This is what you see in that experience. And that is why it is such an important part of iconography. The throne room experience is opened up by that particular outlay of things, right? The flower of life unfolding itself is part of the manipulation of the electromagnetic spirit. And so this is, to me, an intrinsic part of the experience. There is no way to separate from the experience, and that is why it is such a popular motif. Not necessarily because of this particular place, which may or may not have existed ever at any point. Back to the text. If we take the 4 directions and the 4 elements, see note 505, as a symbolical equivalent of the 4 basic functions of consciousness, we can say that Meyer had become conscious of 3 of them by the time he had reached Asia. And one of the problems, right, one of the problems with the way that he designated that is that all of these directions are relative. There is no cardinal point from which this is objectively the center, right? Wherever you are is the center. It doesn't matter if you're here or 5 miles in that way, 500 miles in that way. Wherever you are is going to be your center. And so north to you is going to be north of you. South to you is going to be south of you. East and west, the same thing. And if you move, those things move as well. And so if you are in the United States, then this is going to be the center, and then everything else is going to be relative to that. Assigning these continents a particular attribute is stupid. At the best. At the best. This brings him to the fourth and last, the inferior function. I wonder why he might have identified that with Africa. I wonder why. The inferior function, which is the darkest and most unconscious of all. Africa is not a bad image for this. But just as Meyer was about to direct his steps thither, he had a vision of paradise as the primordial image of wholeness, which showed him that the goal of his journey lay in the attainment of this wholeness. By the time he reached Africa, he says, the sun was in its house, Leo, and the moon was in Cancer, the moon having Cancer for the roof of its house. The proximity of the two houses indicates a conjunctio solis et lunae, the union of supreme opposites, and this is the crowning of the opus and the goal of peregrination. He adds, and this gave me great hope of the best augury. The fourth function has its seat in the unconscious. In mythology, the unconscious is portrayed as a great animal, for instance, Leviathan, or as a whale, wolf, or dragon. We know from the myth of the sun hero that it is so hot in the belly of the whale that his hair falls out. Footnote 506. Frobenius, and is just a note to another book. Aristæus and his companions likewise suffer from the great heat of their prison under the sea. Footnote 507. 507 is, in the intense heat of summer. That does not imply underneath the sea. It might be under the sea, but this sentence does not say that. Right? The alchemists were fond of comparing their fire to the fire of hell or the flames of purgatory. It is important to note that purgatory is not known as having flames. Right? It is the stasis point before you get thrown into the flames, which is completely made up, by the way. And there's no, as far as I am aware, right, I'm not Catholic. Purgatory is not a big deal to me, for damn sure. And right, I'm only tangentially acquainted with it, but my understanding was it was kind of like a waiting room. I mean, not really being punished, but not really being rewarded, just kind of in stasis, waiting for someone else to pray for you. That's just stupid. Meyer gives a description of Africa, which is very like a description of hell. Really. Uncultivated, torrid, and parched, sterile and empty. 508 and 509. 508 is sitabundus, means one who is parched with thirst on the sea, thirsting in the mid-flood of ocean. 509, Meyer completes the picture of hell by citing the legend of the oryx. There, the oryx, thirsting in the great heat of summer, is said to curse the heat of the sun with the shedding of tears and repeated groanings. Is the oryx in hell? I don't know. I've never heard of that thing before. Uncultivated, torrid, parched, sterile, and empty would be completely devoid of life, right? Uncultivated means nobody is actively taking care of it. Torrid is kind of horrible. Parched is without water. Sterile is without growth. And empty is without anything. And so, and this description of hell is completely empty. Not burning flames and fires. He says there are so few springs that animals of the most varied species assemble at the drinking places and mingle with one another, whence new births of animals of a novel appearance are born. That is something that doesn't happen. He's given a description of Africa here, right? Uncultivated, torrid, and parched, sterile, and empty. He must have been in the desert. He must not have gotten below the Sahara, because below the Sahara it is quite lush. There are many jungles, many forests, many plains, savannas, and plateaus, right? A lot of different animals. There are watering places, that is true. And there are even animals of a novel appearance if you came from Europe. And even if you went to Asia or North America, you will see novel animals if you go to Africa. That is a true thing, but it is not because new births from animals, because they are mingling at drinking places, right? You don't have a giraffe mating with a zebra and creating something new. They are mating with their own species and continuing the propagation thereof. And so we are getting less and less to be able to rely upon Meyer. Back to the text, which explain the saying, always something new out of Africa. And that is because theirs is a great, vast continent. It is huge. Most people do not recognize that because of the way that the globe is made. Africa is huge, like really, really big, and it contains a wide variety of species, some of which are not seen anywhere else. Pans dwelt there, and satyrs. We do not have any evidence for either one of those. Dog-headed baboons and half-men. Now, that can be taken for gorillas and things of that nature. Besides innumerable species of wild animals. And so dog-headed baboons and half-men are not counted as wild animals. According to certain modern views, this could hardly be bettered as a description of the unconscious. Meyer further reports that in the region of the Red Sea, an animal is found with the name of ortus, rising origin. It had a red head with streaks of gold reaching to its neck, black eyes, a white face, white forepaws, and black hindpaws. He derived this idea of this animal from the remark of Avicenna. That thing whose head is red, its eyes black, and its feet white, is the Magistry. 510. 510 is from Avicenna's Liber de Anima Artis, to which unfortunately I have no access. The saying is cited as an enigma in Cap X of the Rosarius of Arnaldus de Villanova. There are several animals that might fit this. I think that lemurs may fit this, right? Certain of them, not all of them. There's also a couple of different species of primates, bunkies, that would fit this as well. He was convinced that the legend of this creature referred to the phoenix. Why? That has absolutely nothing to do with the phoenix. The phoenix is a resplendent bird of scarlet and crimson. It catches on fire and burns itself out and then rises from the ashes of itself. It has absolutely nothing to do with a red head, black or white feet, at least in my experience as reading through these various descriptions, which was likewise found in that region. Was it? Was it, though? While he was making inquiries about the phoenix, he had a rumor that not far off a prophetess, known as the Erythraean Sibyl, dwelt in a cave. This was the Sibyl who was alleged to have foretold the coming of Christ. Sure, Meyer is probably referring here not to the 8th book of the Sibylline Oracles, verse 217, at which point 34 verses begin with the following letters. I do not read Greek, but we can go to footnote 511. The cross of Yeshua Christ is the Son of God, Savior. Yeah, no. But to the report of St. Augustine in De Civitate Dei, footnote 512, the city of God. But to the report of St. Augustine in De Civitate Dei, which was well known in the Middle Ages. He also cites the passage about the Sibyl in the Constantini Oriatio of Eusebius and emphasizes that the Sibylline prophecy referred to the coming of Christ in the flesh. 512a. Migni. Right? We have dealt with this so very extensively. I'm going to try not to in this particular one, but once again, Logos was never flesh. We have seen earlier that the Erythraean Sea is a mysterious place, but here we meet with some noteworthy details. To begin with, our author reaches this sea just when he has completed the journey through the 3 continents and is about to enter the critical 4th region. We know from the axiom of Maria and from Faust the crucial importance of that seemingly innocent question at the beginning of Timaeus. We have done the entirety of Timaeus. If you are interested, it is part of the ancient lore and the Plato playlists. Socrates, 1, 2, 3. But where, my dear Timaeus, is the 4th of those guests of yesterday who were to entertain me today? Timaeus, he suddenly felt unwell, Socrates. He would not have failed to join our company if he could have helped it. 513 is Plato's Cosmology. We have had this reference before, right? And I did not go back again to read through Timaeus, but what happens in the beginning of Timaeus is that there are 3 people who come to Socrates for a discussion, And it is told in there that it was someone else there yesterday that did not come today. We do not have the entire full works of all of the things that were from Plato. We have a great deal of them. Some pieces, however, are unexplained, such as this. It might be that this was an allegory, but that is definitely not what you would take from the text if you were to read the text. He was talking to three people. He was giving an argument to those three people. He was continuing an argument from the day before, and none of that, in the beginning, at the very least, has anything at all to do with the elements. It doesn't have to do with earth, air, water, or fire at all. And I know that that is not what is being told here, but that doesn't mean anything. We read through Timaeus, and there are many allegories out there that I don't have the keys for. I try to recognize them and say, well, this might be an allegory, but I don't have the key for it. That did not appear to be an allegory at all. At least while we were reading it. Now, he is seeing something different in it, but that's probably because he is looking for something different in it, and you will find that what you're looking for. The transition from 3 to 4 is a problem. 5:14. There are 2 Armenian legends concerning Alexander, of which the first runs as follows. When Alexander came into the world, he had once ran about the room. That did not happen. But when he came to the 4th corner, an angel struck him down and gave him to understand why he would conquer only 3/4 of the world. He did not do that. In the second legend, Alexander does conquer 3/4 of the world, but not the 4th, which is called that of the righteous poor. A sea surrounds it and cuts it off from the other parts of the earth. Okay, so this did not happen. I mean, first off, Alexander did conquer a large section of the world, but it was not nearly 3/4 of it. It did not touch Africa hardly at all. Some parts of the northern part of Africa, but not any of the southern. He made it as far as Babylon, and that was the end of it, right? He did not rule in Babylon. That is important for reasons of revelation. Right? If that is confusing, fall back to the Revelation studies. And we know who is going to be the bad guys, right? And it is the same guys that have been in charge of Babylon for the entire time. And so Alexander did indeed conquer great sections of the world, but not 3/4 by a long shot. Right? Not even 3/4 of the known world. And so, no. Right? And then, but not the 4th, what is called that of the righteous poor. A sea surrounds it and cuts it off from other parts of the earth. He was at Babylon. Babylon is not surrounded by seas. There is the Persian Gulf that is south and east a little bit, but other than that, no, not at all. And that's where he got held up. That was the end of it. He made it there. He destroyed the city, took over the city, and then died. All right, back to the text. The transition from 3 to 4 is a problem, on which the ambiguous formulation of Maria does not shed very much light. 5:15. 5:15 is from Horace, Epistole. We come across the dilemma of 3 and 4 in any number of guises, and in Meyer's Symbola Ore Mansai, as well the step from 3 to 4 proves to be an important development, presaged by the vision of paradise. The region of the Red Sea is proverbially hot, and Meyer reached it at the end of July, in the intense heat of summer. He was, in fact, getting hot, uncommonly hot as hell, for he was approaching that region of the psyche, which was not unjustly said to be inhabited by pan-satyrs, dog-headed baboons, and half-men. Now, as an allegory for the psyche, perfectly fine, right? Now, the region of the Red Sea is hot. The area around there is called the Negev. It is extremely hot. It is very desolate. There is not a lot of anything that grows out there. And so it can very well just be a literal interpretation, right? It is not in the Negev, however, as hot as the proverbial hell. The proverbial hell is literal fire. That is significantly less than any temperature that is attained naturally in any part of the earth. Right? I think the highest recorded surface temperature is like 124, 125, which is very hot, but is not nearly hot enough to cause flames. It is not difficult to see that this region is the animal soul in man. If that is what you are looking for, okay. And there is no direct correlation, there is no direct causation. Right? For just as a man has a body which is no different in principle from that of an animal, so also his psychology has a whole series of lower stories in which the specters from humanity's past epochs still dwell, and the animal souls from the age of the Pithecanthropus and the hominids, then the psyche of the cold-blooded saurians, and deepest down of all, the transcendental mystery and paradox of the sympathetic and parasympathetic psychoid processes. Most of this is perfectly true. I do not believe in macroevolution. I believe in microevolution. If macroevolution happened, there had to have been an outside source. It did not happen naturally. And so for me, there is a little bit of problem with this because the pithecoids and the hominids are not necessarily the same thing, and the saurians probably did not change into warm-blooded animals. We have gone into that several times. There has to have been an external event that caused that to happen. There is no way that it happened naturally. So it is not surprising that our world voyager felt that he had landed in the hottest place. He was in Arabia Felix, in the sweltering heat of summer. He could have went to Death Valley. It would probably have been a little bit warmer. He was painfully aware that he was risking his skin. It's your concern when your neighbor's wall is on fire. 516. That is true. That is from Horace. Is that the same? Huh. He was the banquet giver and the guest, the eater and the eaten in one person. The innumerable species of animals began to show up already by the Red Sea, headed by the fabulous four-footed ortis, which combines in itself the four alchemical colors, black, white, red, and yellow. There are more. 517. Corresponding to the xanthesis, citrinitas, or yellowing. The gold streaks on the head and neck. Meyer does not hesitate to identify the ortis with the phoenix, the other legendary inhabitant of Arabia Felix. 518. Isidore of Seville, the phoenix Abiru of Arabia, so called because it has a purple color and is singular and unique in all the world. That would be a completely different thing. That is not at all the same. No. I said the description earlier because that is the most common description. It is scarlet and crimson. Sometimes there is some gold thrown in. Sometimes there is some white, but most often it is scarlet and crimson, two varying shades of red. Anything else is related to fire, right? Crimson, scarlet, gold, yellow. These are colors attributed to it. This is the first time that I've seen purple attributed to it, and there is nothing in here about it burning away and coming back, right? It was a purple bird, which is probably something completely different. Less perhaps on account of its appearance than on account of its name. Felix and Phoenix would make sense, right? For the Phoenix, too, after consuming itself in the land of Egypt, each time rose renewed like the reborn son of Heliopolis. The ortis is the alchemical animal, which represents the living quaternity in its first synthesis. In order to become the ever-living bird of the spirit, it needs the transforming fire, which is found in Africa. That is, in the encounter with and investigation of the fourth function and the animal soul represented by the ortus. By interpreting it as the phoenix, Meyer gave it a far-reaching change of meaning, as we shall see. For besides his animal soul, he also discovered in its vicinity a kind of feminine soul, a virgin, to whom he first appeared like an importune guest. 519. 519 says, "Whom," says she, "seekest thou here, stranger? It is not lawful for a man to approach a virgin." The Sibyl pardons him, however, because he is very desirous of learning. This was the Sibyl who foretold the coming of Christ. It would be interesting to find an actual prophecy that did that. There's not one in the Old Testament, so maybe there is one elsewhere. Thus, by the Red Sea, he met the animal soul in the form of a monstrous quaternity, symbolizing, so to speak, the prima materia of the self, and as the phoenix, rebirth. The mystery alluded to here is not only the same encounter with the animal soul, but at the same time and in the same place, the meeting with the anima, the feminine psychopomp who showed him the way to Mercurius, and also how to find the phoenix. 520. 520 is, for the anima in this role, see psychology and alchemy. It is worth noting that the animal is the symbolic carrier of the self. This hint in Meyer is borne out by the modern individuals who have no notion of alchemy. 521. Namely, in the form of symbolic animals which appear in the dreams as prefigurations of self. It expresses the fact that the structure of wholeness was always present, but was buried in profound unconsciousness, where it can always be found again if one is willing to risk one's skin to attain the greatest possible range of consciousness through the greatest possible self-knowledge. A harsh and bitter drink, usually reserved for hell. The throne of God seems to be no unworthy reward for such trials. For self-knowledge, in the total meaning of the word, is not a one-sided intellectual pastime, but a journey through the four continents, where there's only four, right? Not seven, just four. Where one is exposed to all the dangers of land, sea, air, and fire. Any total act of recognition worthy of the name embraces the four, or 360, aspects of existence. Nothing may be disregarded. When Ignatius Loyola recommended imagination through the five senses, footnote 522, spiritual exercises. Imagination through the five senses to the meditant, and told him to imitate Christ by use of his senses, 523. Ibid. What he had in mind was the fullest possible realization of the object of contemplation. Quite apart from the moral or other effects of this kind of meditation, its chief effect is the training of consciousness, of the capacity for concentration, and of attention and clarity of thought. The corresponding forms of yoga have similar effects. But in contrast to these traditional modes of realization, where the meditant projects himself into some prescribed form, the self-knowledge alluded to by Meyer is a projection into the empirical self as it actually is. It is not the self we like to imagine ourselves to be after carefully removing all of the blemishes, but the empirical ego just as it is, with everything that it does and everything that happens to it. Everybody would like to be quit of this odious adjunct, which is precisely why in the East the ego is explained as an illusion, and why in the West it is offered up and sacrificed to the Christ figure. Both of these are not correct, right? We have talked extensively about this, but this is not an illusion, right? It is not. We are here at the direct will of God. That is my understanding of it. It doesn't have to be yours, but if you are here, deal with it. If we are here at the direct will of God, doing things at the direct will of God, created by the will of God, for the will of God, to accomplish something that only we can do through the will of God, then it is extremely probable that this is actually an experience that we are meant to have, and therefore not an illusion. And looking at it as an illusion is a form of victim mentality. It is putting off for the later things that you should take responsibility for now, blaming someone or something else for the things you should take responsibility for in your life. It is very easy to say that these things are difficult, but it's just an illusion, so I am going to ignore them. Many people have done that. The yogis that spend their entire day in contemplation are doing life wrong. This is not an illusion. This is something that we are in, and it is for a purpose. It is the exact same problem with the other part of this, right? Trying to put upon someone else the things that you should take for yourself is victim mentality, and someone else having to die for your sins, that is victim mentality. You should be taking responsibility for that yourself. We have dealt with that extensively, and if that is confusing to you, fall back to the Bible study where we do talk about that in a lot of detail. By contrast, the aim of the mystical peregrination is to understand all parts of the world and to achieve the greatest possible extension of consciousness, as though its guiding principle were carpocratic. 524. 524 is from Psychology and Religion, where the carpocratic idea that one is delivered from no sin which one has not committed, not a turning away from the empirical so-ness, but the fullest possible experience of the ego as reflected in the 10,000 things, that is the goal of peregrination. 525. Angelus Silesius says, however, "Turn inward for your voyage, for all your arts, you will not find the stone in foreign parts." That is exactly what I say. Right? This stone is the philosopher's stone, that is the heart, and you only find out how to use that from internal reflection, not from blaming someone else, not from thinking it's an illusion, but from doing the work that you do not necessarily want to do, right? It was talking before about how it was not what you see yourself as, but what you actually are. That is the shadow work, understanding that yes, you have bad tendencies too. You have a tendency to be a little bit mean. You have a tendency to be judgy. You have a tendency to be greedy. All of these things are true about you, and if you cannot understand that about yourself, you will never achieve enlightenment. And the journey within is the most important one. Yes, you should be out in the world doing those parts too, but the internal reflection is the most important part. This follows logically from the psychological recognition that God cannot be experienced at all unless this futile and ridiculous ego offers a modest vessel in which to kiss the effluence of the Most High and name it with his name. Wrong? I mean, God can be experienced even if you don't have his name. I did that. In fact, if you are attributing a name to it, you are probably doing it incorrectly. And God is beyond your conception of a name. The best that we can do is to limit, or God has limited himself into the finite. We can name the finite, which is the spirit. We can't really name the thing outside of that, the infinite, because we do not have the ability. We can use the appellation of God. That is fine, but it is not his name. Right? There has been no name given that we know that is true. The significance of the Voss symbol in alchemy shows how concerned the artifacts was to have the right vessel in the right content. One is the lapis, one the medicament, one the vessel, one the procedure, and one the disposition. The aqua nostra, the transformative substance, is even its own vessel. That would be the spirit. Anything transformative is going to be the spirit by necessity. 526. Mylius. From this, it is but a step to the paradoxical statement of Angelus Silesius. God is my center when I close him in, and my circumference when I melt in him. That is not paradoxical. 527. Let's see what it says. That is a reference to something else. Okay, so when you do the alignment, right, God becomes the center. That is true. And when you close him in, right, when you try to understand him, he becomes the center of you. And when you let that go, when you do the other part of what is described in this book, right, you have prayer and meditation, right? Prayer is seeking God. It is talking to God. It is moving the energies. It is any part that you are taking part in. Meditation is the opposite of that. It is you not taking part in the process, completely erasing all of the thoughts in your mind and letting yourself melt into God. That is quite literally what happens. Part of this is true. That is the prayer part, and part of it is true. That is the meditation part. And so this is entirely true. Not paradoxical at all, if you have the correct glasses to put on. Myers, Erythraean quadruped. Oh, so now the bird's a quadruped. The ortis. I know maybe it wasn't described as it was identified with the phoenix, and the phoenix is definitely a bird. I mean, from all accounts, except maybe this one. And Myers is definitely a little bit off. Myers' Erythraean quadruped, the ortis, corresponds to the four-wheeled chariot of pseudo-Aristotle. The tetramorph, too, is a product of early medieval iconography. 528. Psychology and alchemy. Combining the four-winged creatures of Ezekiel's vision into a four-footed monster. The interpretation of the Ortus as the phoenix connects it with Christ, whose coming was prophesied by the Sibyl. I've seen that 3 times with no evidence that it was true. For the phoenix is a well-known allegory of the resurrection of Christ and the dead in general. It didn't predate him at all. 529. St. Ambrose says, "Let this bird teach us by his example to believe in the resurrection." Do we see the bird? Has anyone ever actually seen the bird? Do we have any reliable accounts that this was actually ever a real bird? No. Is it even likely that it was? No. It was entirely an allegorical symbology, and therefore you probably should not take it as a literal representative of anything. I mean, there has been, almost certainly, I cannot say certainly, but almost certainly, no bird that just caught up in flames when it reached old age, and then from the ashes thereof arose. That just did not happen. Epiphanius. Why, therefore, did the wicked Jews not believe in the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ on the 3rd day, when a bird brings himself to life again in the space of 3 days? Both cited in Penicillus, and again, we do not have any empirical evidence that that ever happened at all. And this part, why did the wicked Jews not believe in the resurrection? Because this was not foretold by them at all. There is no part of their prophecy that contained this at all. We have dealt with it. We have done the study. That is not a thing. It is the symbol of transformation par excellence. In view of this well-known interpretation of the Phoenix and the Erythraean oracle, it is amazing that any author at the beginning of the 17th century should dare to ask the Sibyl, not to show the way to Christ, but to tell him where he could find Mercurius. I can tell you. This passage offers another striking proof of the parallelism between Mercurius and Christ. Nor does the phoenix appear here as a Christ allegory, but as the bearer and birthplace of the universal medicine, the remedy against wrath and pain, because that is obviously what it was. And right, nobody suffers from wrath or pain these days. That is not a thing that happens to anybody that believes, right? Right? Okay. As the Sibyl once foretold the coming of the Lord, so now she is to point the way to Mercurius, because that would not be a switch at all. Not at all. Christ is the anthropos, the primordial man. That is close. That is really close, right? That is anthropomorphizing the deity, which is not a good thing, right? And the primordial man, not even close. Mercurius has the same meaning as the primordial man, stands for the round original wholeness, long ago made captive by the powers of the world. We have discussed in great detail Mercurius in the second part of this, which was Mercury. You should check it out. This is not a good understanding. In Christ's case, the victory and liberation of the primordial man were said to be complete, so that the labors of the alchemist would seem superfluous. We can only assume that the alchemists were of a different opinion, and that they sought their remedy against wrath and pain in order to complete what they consider to be Christ's unfinished work of redemption. It is characteristic of Meyer's views that the idea of most importance is not Mercurius, who elsewhere appears strongly personified, but a substance brought by the phoenix, the bird of the spirit. It is this inorganic substance, and not a living being, which is used as a symbol of wholeness, or as a means towards wholeness, a desideratum, apparently not fulfilled by the Christ symbol. Footnote 530. If the iconographic symbols spontaneously produced by modern people are examined in this respect, we seldom find a human being as the central figure, in a mandala for instance, but much more frequently an impersonal abstract sign which is meant to express totality. Occasionally there is a face or a head, but this only enhances the analogy with alchemy. The most extreme expression of the abstract and impersonal in alchemy is the lapis, I've already drawn attention to the peculiar nature of these central figures in psychology and religion. Involuntarily, one asks oneself whether the intense personalization of the divine figures, as is customary in Christianity and quite particularly in Protestantism, 531, an exception to this is the third person of the Trinity, the Holy Ghost, who is breathed by Father and Son, active and passive spiration from dogma of the Trinity. He is, as the usual representations show, the most depersonalized of the figures. I've already mentioned the alchemist's preference for a religion of the Holy Ghost. And that is in accordance with me, right? We have talked extensively, and let's hit it again, that the Logos, the breath of life, is the third force, right? But there is the feminine, which was the void that existed prior to. And then there is the masculine, which is the point of light, the infinitesimal point of light, which creates change and penetrates into. And that motion of penetration into is the spirit in motion, right? And so you have the void, which is one half of the spirit, and you have the Logos, which is the other half of the spirit, and those two together are the spirit, and neither part of that is a person. Never has been, never will be. It is represented by you, it is represented by me, it is represented by anything that lives, breathes, moves, grows, or changes. That is the Logos. The Logos is every single instance of change in the entirety of existence, all at the exact same time, and therefore cannot ever be represented by one person in its entirety. If that is confusing, again, I have videos for that. All right. Involuntarily, one asks oneself whether the intense personalization of the divine figures, the anthropomorphication of the divine, right? Giving it the appellation of Father is anthropomorphizing it. As we said before, it has no name, it has no gender as well. I use he because that is the vernacular. It should be a neutral one, but I don't like using those because of the current political situation. Personalization of the divine figures, as is customary in Christianity, and quite particularly in Protestantism, is not in the end compensated and to some extent mitigated by a more objective point of view emanating from the unconscious. All right, E, ascent and descent. In his quest for wholeness so far, Michael Meyer, besides crossing 3 continents and traveling in 3 directions, has discovered a statue of Mercurius pointing the way to paradise. He has glimpsed paradise from afar. He has found the animal soul and the sibylline anima, who now counsels him to journey to the 7 mouths of the Nile in order to seek for Mercurius. The continuation of his pilgrimage recalls the flight of the phoenix from Arabia, where it lives, to Egypt, where it dies and arises anew. We may therefore expect that something similar will befall the author. We are not told anything of his crossing of the Red Sea and of his recapitulation in the reverse direction of the miraculous wanderings of the children of Israel. See Exodus. We do, however, soon learn that something like a rebirth mystery is to take place because Meyer compares the 7 mouths of the Nile to the 7 planets. This is probably a representation of these, right? There are 7 steps, there are 7 virtues, there are 7 vices. These are coins: lust and wrath, or love and wrath, lust and chastity, gluttony and denial, greed and charity, pride and humility, sloth and diligence, faith and despair. These represent the 7 steps into attainment of balance, which leads to enlightenment, which brings about the Mercurius, or the Holy Spirit, and the ability to use it. That is almost certainly what this is describing, right? Even though Meyer, in other places, has not had a good description of things. 7 mouths to the Nile, 7 planets, like the repetition of this is definitely probably something. Definitely, probably. He first reaches the Canopic Gate, the western mouth of the delta, where he finds Saturn domiciled. Saturn would be a good representative for wrath. Of the remaining planets, we can recognize only Mars with certainty. That is interesting. as the description of the cities where the others dwell is not very clear. Really. That is very interesting. Like, it is common knowledge, right? For anyone seeking this, even at that period of time, the attributes of the planets, right? It would be well within his capacity to describe it if that was what he was actually intending, was the physical planets. That is a very interesting note right there. I'm intrigued. Amid innumerable hazards, he traverses the 7 regions without meeting Mercurius. He does not find him even in his own city. Finally, he has to turn back and retrace his steps until he reaches the Canopic Gate, where this time he finds Mercurius. So he goes through the 7 in both directions, and then he finds the spirit. That is interesting. Although he learns from him all sorts of secrets, he fails to find the phoenix. Later, he will return again in order to discover the panacea. In his Epigramma ad Phenoceum, he begs the wonderful bird to give the wise man its feathers. 532. That is a reference to another book. We'll be back at 535. He begs the wonderful bird to give the wise man its feathers, and in his epigram to the Medicina Phenocae, he rates it above riches and gold, and he who does not think so is not a man but a beast. Once again, that would, to me, right, to me, in my confirmation bias, that would indicate these things, right? Above riches and gold, that is very important. That is the point of alchemy, is not creating literal gold, but instead spiritual gold. The experience of the 4th quarter, the region of fire, an example, the inferior function, is described by Meyer as an ascent and descent through the 7 planetary spheres. That is an exact corroboration, right? There are 2 forces. There is a dark force and a light force, symbolized by this white circle and this black circle. You can see that they are blended into gray in the overall, right? That is because you pull from the bottom, the dark source, all the way up, and then you pull from the top, the light source, all the way down. It is a journey, both up and down, and both are necessary if you are going to find the balance in the Holy Spirit, which would be the representative of Mercurius, as we have discussed in extreme detail already in this study. Even if the peregrination up to this point was not an allegory of the opus alchemicum, from now on it certainly is. The opus is a transistus, a Pyapatis, in the Gnostic sense, a transcension and transformation, whose subject and object is the elusive Mercurius. Once again, confirmation bias definitely acknowledged. I will not discuss the nature of the transitus here in any great detail. If you would like that detail, I do have it. As this would be the proper concern of an account of the opus itself. One aspect of the transitus, however, is the ascent and descent through the planetary spheres. And to this we must devote a few words. As the Tabula Smaragdina shows, the purpose of the ascent and descent is to unite the powers of above and below. And once again, I will point out, these 3 on the bottom, that is the as below powers, right? These are urges, right? And these 3 at the top, that is the as above power. Those are guidings, right? This is love and wrath, lust and chastity, gluttony and temperance. They have to do with your physical body. This is pride and humility, sloth and diligence, and hope and despair. Those have to do with the spiritual body. This one right here in the middle, greed and charity, it binds together the love of the below, greed, with the love of the above, charity, into the Philosopher's Stone, allowing you to have access to the Holy Spirit in its fullness, light and dark, otherwise known as Mercurius. As above, so below. It does have a meaning. So does the right and left-hand path, by the way. And it is not what is attributed to it normally, right? There is nothing intrinsically evil about the left-handed path. That is something that was put upon it. Back to the text. A feature worthy of special notice is that in the opus there is an ascent followed by a descent, whereas the probable Gnostic Christian prototype depicts first the descent and then the ascent. Now, in the allegory that I am describing, not this one, but the one that I am describing, it doesn't matter which one you use first. It doesn't matter if you pull the energy down then up or up then down. It does not matter as long as you are using both and working through them. If you are pulling from the bottom, that is the feminine traits. If you're pulling from the top, that is the masculine traits. And that identifies which side of the coin you are to work on, right? If you're using the masculine powers, if you're pulling down, then you are balancing the masculine side of the coin, which is the part that can be removed, right? You cannot add chastity. You can only add lust. You can remove lust, but you cannot add chastity. And so lust is the masculine thing. Wrath, same deal, right? You can add wrath. You can remove wrath, masculine. It is the same for all 7 of them, right? And when you are using the positive white energies, that would be the masculine side. Learn to identify and correct your right side. And then when you're using the other side, learn to identify and correct the other side. There are numerous evidences of this in the literature, and I do not need to cite them here. I will quote only the words of one of the great Greek fathers, St. Basil, who says in his explanation of Psalm 17:10, footnote 534, we are still not there, okay. And he bowed the heavens and came down, and a black cloud was under his feet. David says here, God came down from heaven to help me and to chastise his enemies. But he clearly prophesies the incarnation of Christ when he says, no, he doesn't. He bowed the heavens and came down. For he did not break through the heavens, it did not make the mystery manifest, but came to earth secretly, like rain upon the fleece. That is you attempting something, right? That is just you trying to explain. That is all. That is self-insertion to the nth degree. There is no reason to say from this that was Christ at all. That is simply you looking for your confirmation bias and not acknowledging it. Footnote 535. The passage refers to Psalm 71. He shall come down like the rains upon the fleece. And Judges 6:37. I will put this fleece of wool on the floor. Now, there was a test, right, that was given. They put the fleece on the floor, and the test was let the fleece get wet and nothing else, and it did. And then the next day it was let the fleece stay dry and nothing else, and it did, right? That was prophecy given and returned in the same time at the same place. Right? Now this part, we did not do a study of Psalms, so I am not going to attempt to correct, but this is probably not going to be it either. Because the incarnation was secret and unknown, and his coming into the world order was hidden. It was so hidden that there were signs in the sky. It was so hidden that there was a genocide that never happened. It was so hidden, right? Completely and totally hidden. It was hidden. Nobody knew about it. Seriously? Seriously. Really? Okay. There's a lot of problems, right? Fall back to the Bible study. Commenting on the next verse. And he was borne upon the cherubim, and he flew. Basil says, for in ascending he rose above the cherubim, whom David named also the wings of the wind, on account of their winged and stormy nature. By the wings of the wind is also meant the cloud which took him up. 537. Refers to Acts 1:9. And a cloud received him out of their sight. Irenaeus summed up the mystery of the lapidary, saying, for it is he who descended and ascended for the salvation of men. 538, and that is not correct. That is just from the writings of Irenaeus. In contrast to this, in alchemy, the ascent comes first and then the descent. I would mention the ascent and descent of the soul in the Rosarium illustrations, 539, reproduced in Psychology of the Transference. The ascent and descent of the soul in the Rosarium illustrations, and above all the exordium in the Tabulus Margina, whose authority held sway throughout the Middle Ages. 4. Its father is the sun, its mother the moon. The wind hath carried it in its belly, its nurse is the earth. That is the spirit. Its power is complete when it is turned towards the earth. again, the spirit. And this is 8, so we're skipping 7. It ascendeth from the earth to heaven, and descendeth again to the earth, and receiveth the power of the higher and lower things. So wilt thou have the glory of the whole world. 540. Tabula Smaragdina. These articles, whose subject is sometimes masculine and sometimes neuter, describe the sun, moon, child. That again would be the spirit, as described so extensively in, I think it was part 2, who is laid in the cradle of the 4 elements, attains full power through them, and the earth, rises to heaven and receives the power of the upper world, then returns to the earth, accomplishing, it seems, a triumph of wholeness. Gloria totius mundi. The words, so wilt thou have, are evidently addressed to the philosopher, for he is the artifex of the filius philosophum. If he succeeds in transforming the arcane substance, he will simultaneously accomplish his own wholeness, which will manifest itself as the glory of the whole world. There can be no doubt that the arcane substance, whether in neuter or personified form, rises from the earth, unites the opposites, and then returns to the earth, grounding, thereby achieving its own transformation into the elixir. He riseth up and goeth down in the tree of the sun, till he becomes the elixir, says the Concilium Coniunctionis. 541. 541 is from Ars Chemica. The text continues. Someone hath said, 542. 542. This someone is as clear from the later text as the beloved in the Song of Songs. An example, Luna. She speaks here to soul. And when I rise naked to heaven, then shall I come clothed upon the earth, and shall perfect all minerals. 543. 543 is possibly an allusion to the Tabula Smaragdina. And if we are baptized in the fountain of gold and silver, and the spirit of our body, the arcane substance, ascends into heaven with the Father and Son, and descends again, then shall our souls revive, and my animal body will remain white, that is, the body of the moon. 544. Concilium Coniunctionis, or Remain in the Golden Tree, page 211. There may be a reference here to John 3:13, and no one has ascended into heaven except him who is descended from heaven. Well, that is not true. Okay, you don't have to like it, but I have had an experience by which I was taken from myself into the cosmos, and I got to see the development of the cosmos, of everything playing out, of all of the interconnectedness of things. It was a life-changing experience for me. It is something that is referred to as the throne room experience. There are many different variations of it. The one that I had was me going up and seeing, right? Going to the heavens. And so ascended into heaven. Yeah. Even then, right? In John 3:13. Where did he not go? Where did he not go? Did he not ascend? Did he not go? Is that not what happened to him? There are other references to the same thing that happened to other people. Did Elijah not get called into the heavens? Did Isaiah not get called into the heavens? See how that self-insertion just throws everything off? I mean, well, obviously this one person is the only person that could ever achieve this thing, and therefore everybody else is just inferior, and so you shouldn't even try. You should cast it upon him for your redemption. Stupid. Here, the union of opposites consists in a descent to heaven and a descent to earth in the bath of the tincture. The earthly effect is first a perfection of minerals, then a resuscitation of souls, and a transfiguration of the animal body, which before was dark. A parallel passage in the Concilium runs. His soul rises up from it. 545. From the sulfur nostrum previously referred to. His soul rises up from it, and is exalted to the heavens, that is, to the spirit, and becomes the rising sun, that is red, and the waxing moon, and the solar nature. 546. In luna crescente in natura solarum. This could also be translated, waxing in luna, into the nature of the sun. And the lantern with 2 lights. 547. In the light of sun and moon. two lights, above and below. Just saying, confirmation bias is acknowledged, but this is exactly what I would expect. Which is the water of life? Yes. The two lights, which is the water of life? Yes. And then will return to its origin, that is, to earth. And it becomes of low estate, is humbled and decays, and is joined to its beloved, the terrestrial sulfur. 548 and 549. 548 is from the 1566 edition. I read Urn, and 549 is from Concilium Coniunctionis of the transposition of the lights and the Kabbalah. This text describes the ascent of the soul of the arcane substance, the incombustible sulfur, again referred to sulfur. The soul, as Luna, attains its plenilunium, its sun-like brilliance, then wanes into the novolunium, and sinks down into the embrace of the terrestrial sulfur, which here signifies death and corruption. We are reminded of the gruesome conjunction at the new moon in Meyer's Scrutininium Chemicum, where the woman and the dragon embrace in the grave. 550. In Bella, the dragon slays the woman and she him, and together they are bespattered with blood. The description Dorn gives in his Physica Trismegisti is also to the point. In the end, it will come to pass that this earthly, spagritic birth clothes itself with heavenly nature by its ascent, and then, by its descent, visibly puts on the nature of the center of the earth. But nevertheless, the nature of the heavenly center which is acquired by the ascent is secretly preserved. 551. Theatrica Chemicum. This birth conquers the subtle and spiritual sickness in the human mind, and also all bodily defects, within as well as without. This medicament is produced in the same way as the world was created. Elsewhere, Dorn remarks that the fetus spaguritius is forced by the fire to rise up to heaven, calum, by which he means from the bottom of the vessel to the top, and from there it descends again after attaining the necessary degree of ripeness, and returns to earth. This spirit becomes corporeal again after having become spirit from a body. 552. Dorn adds, it was hidden of old by the philosophers in the riddle. Make the fixed, said they, volatile, and the volatile fixed, and you will have the whole magistry. The fixed being the as below, the volatile being the as above. As if in contradiction to the Tabula Smardina, whose authority he follows here, Dorn writes in his Philosophia Speculativa, no one ascends into the heaven which ye seek, unless he who descends from the heavens which ye do not seek enlighten him. 553. 553 is here. The allusion to John 3:13 is even clearer. Dorn was perhaps the first alchemist to find certain statements of his art problematical. 554. That is a reference to another book. And it was for this reason that he provided his fetus Spagiricus, who behaves in all too Basilidian manner, with a Christian alibi. At the same time, he was conscious that the artifacts was indissolubly one with the opus. 555. He says, for instance, learn from within thyself to know that all is in heaven and on earth, that thou mayest be wise in all things. Knowest thou not that heaven and the elements were formerly one, and were separated from one another by divine artifice, that they might bring forth thee in all things? If thou knowest this, the rest cannot escape thee, or thou lackest all sense. Again, in every generation such a separation is necessary, as I have said above, and needs to be effected of thyself, before thou settest sail towards true philosophy. Thou wilt never make from others the one which thou seekest, except first there be made one thing of thyself. The stages of ascent are devotion to the faith, knowledge of God by faith, love from the knowledge of God. And I do not disagree with those three, and I do not disagree with this paragraph at all, Learn from yourself all that is to know, that is internal self-reflection. meditative practices, even as described in this book. Right? All heaven and elements were formerly one is the very first, or the second chapter, chapter 1 in this book. Right? I start with chapter 0. That is the source from which it comes. And then we go into the source from which all things come, which is indeed the Spirit. Right? We have discussed that quite extensively as we have gone through. There is nothing in this that is out of accordance with what I say. None of it. All of it is in accordance. All right. His speculations are not to be taken lightly, as they are occasionally of the greatest psychological interest. An example, the descent of the four and the ascent to the monad are simultaneous. That is true, in what my understanding, right? The monad is God. It is the one. The four are the four elements, and the monad is the original unity which reappears in the denarius, the number 10, the goal of the opus. It is the unity of the personality projected into the unity of the stone. Again, I agree. Right? The stone being the heart, the point that brings them together, and it is projecting your personality. The descent is analytic, a separation into the four components of wholeness. The ascent, synthetic, a putting together of the denarius. This speculation accords with the psychological fact that the confrontation of conscious and unconscious produces a dissolution of the personality and at the same time regroups it into a whole. This can be seen very clearly in moments of psychic crisis, for it is just in these moments that the symbol of unity, for instance, the mandala, occurs in a dream. It is indeed odd that the mandala, the unfolding of the flower of life, the beginning of the psychic transformation process, should show up if you are in a moment of psychic crisis. That is indeed something that should be noted. Where danger is, there arises salvation also, says Holderlin. While the older authors keep strictly to the Tabulus Magna, 557, the Rosarium Philosophica formulates the ascent and descent as follows. Our stone passes into earth, earth into water, water into air, air into fire, and there it stays. But on the other hand, it descends. And I'm not in disagreement, I just don't think that goes far enough. The more modern ones, under the leadership of Dorn, tend to present the process the other way around. For instance, Mylius says that the earth cannot ascend unless heaven comes down first, and even then the earth can be sublimated to heaven only if it is dissolved in its own spirit. 558. The water in which the earth is dissolved is the earth's soul, or spirit, of which Signor says, this divine water is the king descending from heaven. Before that, the king was in the earth. Dissolved in its own spirit and becomes one substance therewith. 559. This idea derives from the Ars Chemica. Here the descent is identical with God's incarnation. Our passage is followed by the text. I will content thee with this parable. The Son of God coming down into the Virgin, and there clothed with flesh is born as a man, who, after showing us the way of truth for our salvation, suffering and dying for us, after his resurrection returned to heaven, where the earth, that is mankind, is exalted above all circles of the world and set in the intellectual heaven of the most holy Trinity. I disagree with all of that. The Paracelsus Penotus is even more emphatic. Speaking of Mercurius, he says, as to how the Son of Man, filius hominis, is generated by the philosopher, and the fruit of the Virgin is produced, it is necessary that he be exalted from the earth and cleansed of all earthliness. Then he arises as a whole into the air and is changed into spirit. Thus the word of the philosopher is fulfilled. He ascends from earth to heaven and puts on the power of above and below, and lays aside his earthly and unclean nature. That doesn't have anything necessarily to do with Christ. Now, I want to point out once again, because it is so vitally important, that Isaiah never prophesied a virgin birth. Fall back to Isaiah if you need clarification. Footnote 560. That is from the Theatrica Chemicum. This complete identification of the lapis with the Son of Man must obviously end with its ascension, but that contradicts the original and widespread conception of the lapis as a tincture or medicine, which has meaning and value only if it applies to the base substances of the lower world. That is because the Son of Man was not the lapis. The upper world is in need of no medicine, since it is incorruptible anyway. A redeemer who proceeds from matter and returns to matter gradually became unthinkable. Those who identified the lapis absolutely with Christ stopped working in the laboratory, and those who preferred laboratory work slowly gave up their mystic language. Ascent and descent, above and below, up and down, represent an emotional realization of opposites, and this realization gradually leads, or should lead, to their equilibrium. This motif occurs very frequently in dreams, in the form of going up and downhill, climbing stairs, going up and down in a lift, balloon, airplane, etc. 561. Psychology and Alchemy. It corresponds to the struggle between the winged and wingless dragons. In example, the Ouroboros. We talked before about how the as above is the winged and the as below is the wingless. Whether it is a dragon or a dove does not matter. Dorn describes it also as the circular distillation. 562 is Physica's Trismegisty, and as the spaghetic vessel, which has to be constructed after the likeness of the natural vessel. In example, the form of a sphere. As Dorn interprets it, this facilitating between the opposites and being tossed back and forth means being contained in the opposites. They became a vessel in which that was previously now one thing and now another floats, vibrating, so that the painful suspension between opposites gradually changes into the bilateral activity of the point in the center. 563. This motif is not uncommon in mandalas drawn by patients, the center being represented either by a fluttering bird or a pulsing cyst or heart. In pathology, we speak of auricular flutter. The same motif appears in the form of concentric rings. See a study in the process of individuation or of waves surrounding a center. This is the liberation from opposites. The what? The liberation from what? The nerdvana of Hindu philosophy, though it is not really a philosophical but rather a psychological development. The Aurelia Occulta put this thought into the words of the dragon. Many from one, and one from many, issue the famous line, I rise from the lowest to the highest. The nethermost power of the whole world, earth, is united with the highest. I am therefore the one and the many within me. 564. 564 is from Theatrica Chemicum. In these words, the dragon makes it clear that he is the chthonic forerunner of the self. And that is going to bring us to the end of this particular investigation, right? Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult series of topics. I understand I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I do have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. There was some good information in this, right? There was some good meat. If you stop and pause on the points where we talked about the correlations to this, it is a direct one, right? If you have read the book, you will know. This is the exact process that I talk about, right? The bringing of the virtues and the vices into accordance by balancing yourself between them, overtaking either of the virtues or the vices is bad. You are not meant to never have sex. You are not meant to never have possessions. That is a misconception. This is not an illusion. You are in a reality. Is it a permanent one? Nope. Your soul will go somewhere else whenever it leaves here. But until then, it is here for the experience. Part of that experience is having things. Part of that experience is procreation. Part of that experience is learning to balance your love and wrath. All of these things are part of the experience. And if you embrace them, you will achieve good things in your life. You will bring balance into your life. We have, nowadays, the lens of history to look back on, and some of these things are not exactly correct, but they're close enough. right? And as we said before, the lesser understandings can help you reach a higher understanding. And so if you only know about 3 points, that is enough to ascend and descend and get started at the very least. It may even be possible to do the entire process with just that understanding. I have a higher understanding, I believe, of the 7 points. That is for a reason, and even the 8th is for a reason. It is the beginning of the next harmonic. It is the encapsulation of you within the divine, the individualization even of who you are. Going up and down the stack, extremely important. I talk about it a lot. This balancing procedure is the key mechanic for using the electromagnetic forces of creation, which I have done to heal myself. That's where I'm going to wrap this one up. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow, throw me a comment. Whether you agree or disagree with anything that was stated, put it in the box down below. And if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you really like what I'm doing over here, hit me with that super thanks. Consider joining for a membership, picking up a copy of my book, consulting me directly for a consultation, or hitting that hype button. That one is free and it will help the channel greatly. It will be much appreciated. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.